Another exciting week in the FinTech summer sessions. We're going to get started shortly. I'm seeing the numbers climb here, so we're just waiting for participants to log in. Very happy to have you here with us for another very exciting session for our FinTech Summer Sessions 24. This is session number 6, if you are wondering, and it's going to be a very interesting session. I'll tell you a bit more about it in a minute. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome to the FinTech Summer Sessions. Until people join, let me tell you that if you are joining for the first time, you can go back and listen to and watch FinTech Summer Sessions 22, FinTech Summer Sessions 23. They are on our YouTube channel. So please go ahead and take a look at them if you haven't seen them before. If you are a returning participant, thank you again for joining us. As you may have seen, the last 5 weeks were super exciting. We've had some very, very interesting discussions covering different aspects of the fintech sector. Last week, we had Yassine with us, who was telling us all about super apps. We talked about CBDCs, we talked about wealth management. So it's been really, really exciting. And we have a very exciting topic for you today as well, which is embedded financial solutions. We wanted to call it embedded everything, but embedded financial solutions is what we ended up with. And we have a very special speaker with us today delivering this session. Before I introduce him, I want to let you all know that, as has been the case for this year, we have a very exciting announcement related to 24 FinTech. So we've announced 24 FinTech previously. We have 2 more exciting announcements for you related to 24 FinTech. So do stick around till the end. You do not want to miss those announcements. I will make sure that we cover them towards the end. In the meantime, make sure you join the Telegram group that we've shared the link for in the chat if you haven't done so already. This is where all previous sessions are being shared, the recordings as well as the presentations. So will be this presentation as well. We will share it on the Telegram group. So if you have not joined the Telegram group, please go ahead and click on that link and join the Telegram group. So without further ado, I am super excited actually today about this session and looking forward to getting the insights from Arjun Singh. So Arjun doesn't want me to do a very glamorous introduction, but Sani, I'm going to do the bare minimum, which is going to be amazing because he's definitely a prominent figure when it comes to the fintech sector in Saudi Arabia, in the region, but also worldwide. Yani, to a certain extent, I would easily say so. He's an enthusiast and an advocate of the future of financial services, and is always pushing the lines and the borders when it comes to what that future might look like. Arjun is a partner at Arthur Doolittle. Arthur Doolittle is one of the very well known and respected consultancy firms around the world. He is a partner and also global co-head of fintech at Arthur Doolittle. Uh, I know for a fact that I'm going to be learning something in this session, and I'm going to give you a small tip. I don't know if he will mention it or not, but Arjun does have a super interesting podcast. It's called Couchonomics with Arjun, where he brings in a prominent fintech co-founders and CEOs to talk about their products and what they're doing. So if I were you, I would definitely take a look at his podcast. I'm an avid listener of his podcast, and will probably share that link with you as well for you to take a look at. without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Arjun, and we'll be back with you for your Q&As toward the end of the session. Arjun, welcome to the FinTech Summer Sessions again. You've been with us in the previous editions, and we're always excited and happy to have you with us. So thank you again for joining us today, and we're looking forward to learning all about embedded financial solutions.
Thank you, Kareem. So thanks, and it's very strange speaking to a large audience but not being able to see anybody. So I'll try and maintain focus. So I don't think there is any more introduction as far as myself or Arthur D. Little is concerned. I think Kareem has done more than a wonderful job. I'll just say two things at the beginning. One is I have been in the region for the last nearly 15 years. So this is my 15th year. And, I have actually seen an amazing transformation in the world of financial services generally, right? Whether it is fintech or otherwise. I think the lines between fintech and, I guess, traditional finance are fast blurring because who is not using technology for everything these days. So it's been a great journey. The second thing is what really got me interested on this topic, or at least I volunteered to talk about this topic, is because I think embedded finance is about taking financial services beyond financial services, right? Because this is about how does financial services embed itself into retail, into automotive sector, into healthcare, into travel, so on and so forth. So I get super excited because this is, in my humble view, this is financial services becoming a horizontal rather than a vertical. And I hope there are people on the panel here or on the listening audience who have come from other sectors so that we can talk about it. I'll cover three areas in my presentation. We'll talk a little bit about what is embedded finance or embedded everything, because, what can't you embed these days? And why does it have such a potential? Secondly, why is the time now to talk and speak about this more? And beyond just what we have already seen in terms of embedded finance, and you will talk a little bit about BNPL being one of the poster childs of embedded finance. And then I'll end with a sort of a tempering view, which is to say that, we're only at the very beginning of this journey. And actually there is a lot more in front of us than what is behind us. So, we are in a lot of ways, in my humble opinion, only 1% done in this journey. And I think this journey for anybody who's going to be involved in financial services, fintech or otherwise, I think is going to be an essential part of our careers going forward, whether we are working on the financial services side or otherwise. So I'll dive in. I'll try and keep a healthy pace. As Kareem said, please feel free to field some questions. You will have access to this deck. And also, in addition to this, just to make a point from the very beginning, I've shared about half a dozen articles which have been authored by either colleagues of mine or me, or co-authored by all of us, which give you details of different types of embedded finance. So that'll be shared by Fintech Saudi, so you could. So let's start with this, right? Now, what we're seeing in the world of financial services, in my view, is a number of shifts, right? And I use the word shift because they're actually changing the paradigm of what it means or what financial services meant, right? And they are actually shifting the entire value chain in different parts of the value chain. The four that I have picked for this page, and by no means these are the only four, we're actually seeing a complete shift in consumer behavior or customer behavior, because I don't think it's just about the consumers, it's also the businesses, right? And this is being driven by a number of factors, whether it is the fact that their lives are becoming more digital, whether the concept of loyalty and brand appeal is changing. The other thing which is changing at the same time is that every part of our life, whether our business life or our personal life, has more and more technology infusing itself into the way we do things. And that's actually creating a completely different playground on which financial services can operate. Thirdly, especially in our parts of the world, I think the regulators and governments have taken a very progressive step. Now, I do appreciate that a lot of founders on the call might feel that, this is still not enough. And yes, I can understand where you come from. But trust me, for an old horse like me who's been sort of doing this for 20 plus years, I think we've seen some of the most progressive decisions that regulators and governments have made. And I would go as far as saying that regulators are becoming market makers increasingly, right? And you have great catalysts. I'm a big fan of Saudi payments, for example, right, which has been a huge catalyst of digital payments within the kingdom. And there are other examples such as this, not just in the kingdom, but also in the wider. And then, we're seeing a whole host of new types of competition entering financial services. There are fintechs, what I like to call speedboats, with innovative young founders who have disruptive views towards how things can be done. There are tech fins, which are companies which are producing new technology for the financial services worlds, right? There are non-financial institutions, which are... Sorry, can someone go on mute? Sorry. Okay. All right. And then I said in fact, now what is actually that leading to? What's that leading to is a number of different trends which are emerging, right? One of the trends that we are actually seeing, which is now taking an increasingly strong foothold, is about embedded everythings. So I'm not going to focus on any of those dark blue ones, although they do have an influence on embedded finance. I'm going to focus on what I refer to as embedded everything. So I guess the question is, what is embedded finance, right? So in simple terms, there's a definition on the left-hand side. I think that's kind of universally acceptable, which is the ability to embed financial services, whether they are payments to insurance, right, to make a non-financial offering richer, more seamless, and convenient, right? And I'll give you the simplest example that we are all using, or at least most of us are using, is basically things like Apple Pay, right? To me, that's a great example of how financial services has embedded itself in a journey that is completely non-financial services, and we don't even think about that step in the process, right? So that's a great that's a great example. Why is it so important? And I've listed four factors, and there are many more. One is it's actually helping both financial services and non-financial services extend their addressable market, and everybody is looking to pursue that. We talk about TAM when we talk to fintechs and startups, and they're like, oh, target addressable market. So there it goes. It's enhancing user experience. I use the Apple Pay example, right? It gives us the opportunity to get to know our customers better by actually capturing and analyzing data, which is incredibly rich. And I believe the financial services data is arguably as rich as any other form of data, if not richer, right? And funnily enough, embedded finance has both direct and indirect attractive economics, both for the embedder, and I'll come to that later, and also for financial services. So there is a win-win scenario out there. And so the customer is winning, the embedder is winning, the financial services player is winning. So this is why I believe it's important. Now, as I said, and use this slide as more as indicative in terms of where the 4 or 5 boxes are, but they give you a general direction in terms of market potential and market opportunity, right? Now, the reason I've actually put wealth on the bottom left is because if you look at wealth in isolation, you can argue that it doesn't have that much potential. But let's assume if you start combining embedded wealth with embedded savings, right, the market potential goes up. And I'll come to that in a second. We have embedded insurance, which has tremendous potential, in effect, and especially in a market where insurance is underpenetrated, right? And then you have something like embedded payments, which is basically being something that most of us are very familiar with. Now, let me be very clear. A payment gateway integrated to an e-commerce site is not embedded finance, right? It was a great step towards embedded finance, but to me, that is integrated finance, right? And so therefore, from a market potential perspective, I personally think that in payments, you're going to see both integrated and embedded. And so hence, I don't get that I don't give it that high a score, but it's high enough. I think embedded lending is where it's actually going to get very, very interesting, because I think there's a lot of innovation happening. But it doesn't stop here, right? You can embed loyalty programs, and we're starting to see that happening. You can actually start embedding the whole banking world, right? Into to the way that, super apps have done it. And, WeChat's a great example. And then just to make this matter even more interesting, there is the flip side, which is banks can start to embed non-financial services into their offering, which allows them to go beyond banking. So this concept of convergence between financial services and non-financial services has disruptive potential, which I could not put a finger to because it's massive, right? But it's here, and it's already starting to show its potential. Now, I took a slide in because a number of times people have asked me what is the difference between integrated payment, integrated finance, and embedded finance. And here's an example that I have borrowed off somebody else, but I think this sums it up incredibly well, right? Something which is embedded is something which is inherently within the core proposition of what is being offered, right? And in this case, there is a floor plan of an apartment, right? And a bedroom is, in my view, embedded to the overall offering, right? An integrated payment is something that you potentially add, right, to the core offering, which becomes quite integral, but at the end of the day, it's not deeply embedded and it's integral. Now, we don't want to get into, the argument of nuances of is it integrated, it's embedded. The point we're trying to make here is that if they can actually tick off the benefits that are listed on the right-hand side, right, it becomes a little bit easier to sort of differentiate between embedded finance and integrated finance. But as I said again, let's not get carried away too much in the nomenclature of what it is. But I thought this would be a good example. I'll move to the next slide, which is it takes a number of players for embedded finance to come to fruition, right? And this is a picture I like to show, which is putting the different bits and pieces together, right? In the core chain, if I may use that word, okay, we have everybody from government, because regulation will play a very critical role in embedded finance for it to actually realize its potential, right? Whether that is regulators, whether they are government-backed ecosystem developers. I mentioned Saudi payments. There are some very interesting ones in India called UPI. There's Pix in Brazil. Then you have the incumbent players, and it's very important. In my humble opinion, the embedded finance party is never going to be the full party till the incumbents don't come to the party, right? So it's not something that can bypass the providers. It needs to be done by the incumbent providers. We then have who I call the enablers, or in my word, which I also refer to as magic makers. These are the fintechs, right? These are the tech things, but actually there can be some other parties too. You could have banks playing the role of an enabler. I just mentioned the fact that banks can go beyond. You have NBFIs. There are in some cases government entities which are actually playing the role of enablers. And then arguably, right, the most, I guess, important, not significant in the sense that they're equally significant, but most important because that's where embedded finance comes to life, is who we refer to as embedders, right? And these could be any non-FI sector, right? It could be anything from retail to healthcare and everything in between, right? It could be big techs, and we all talk about Apple and what they're doing. It could be government. It could actually be banks, and especially neobanks and digital banks, which are coming on board. And then finally, there are end users. And this is another important point that I want to make, that actually embedded finance is not just a B2C opportunity. Arguably, it is a bigger B2B opportunities, because I think the B2B sector has been ignored more than the B2C sector, especially if we look at fintech disruption over the last 10 to 15 years. It's only in the last 5 to 7 years are we starting to see, what I call really solid B2B fintechs that are coming up, which are looking to service the corporate sector, corporate or the micro and small businesses, right? The potential is big. I don't want to labor on the numbers. It's a big enough number. And I guess this is the point which this slide is trying to make, that whoever has done these analyses, bless them. The fact of the matter is the number is big enough, and it's big enough in any value that we look at it. This is a valuation view. There are other reports from a number of companies which will talk about what the revenue upside is. Some will even give you the profit upside, so on and so forth. The value is big. What's more interesting is where does the value sit, right? And as I said to it, it's a B2C and B2B. Yes, there is a certain level of bias towards, if I may say, retail and e-commerce. And largely that is because of, payments playing a significant role and lending playing a significant role, point to sale lending, which BNPL is a part of. But that does not mean that the other sectors are insignificant, right? You could sort of split the pie into two, or in this case, the bar into two, right? Retail has the bulk opportunity, and retail, I mean, in the loosest term. But actually, you have to understand this is not just payments, but I've added some product categories at the bottom so that you get an idea of what it is. But then there's every other sector in the world that you can possibly imagine. And there are examples galore. As a matter of fact, if you wait a week, I'm about to publish an article which would be shared on LinkedIn, where we have captured maybe 40 to 50 use cases, right, in non-retail categories where things like BNPL, embedded insurance are already starting to take traction. So wait for that for a week. That was not the big announcement that Kareem was talking about. That's just me telling you that there's more to come. Right. So why are we talking about this now? And this is the part where I think I want to stress a little bit of time in this session, right? So the way we see it is that there are 7 key growth drivers, right, or catalysts, or whatever you'd like to choose, right? And there is a good reason for all these 7 catalysts to play a role in terms of delivering embedded finance. They're enabled by a number of supporting drivers, which are at the bottom. I'm not going to cover those in today's discussion. I think they are largely self-explanatory. But if there is a Q&A on this, I'm more than happy to answer. So who are they? So one is the end users, and I'm specifically focusing on individuals and micro and small businesses. That does not mean large corporates don't need it, but that's the focus. The second are embedders. I talked about it, non-FIs. The fintechs and the tech fins, which are the enablers, the providers, which are typically our classic traditional banks and insurance companies, the regulators. And then there are 2 very interesting catalysts who typically don't sit, I guess, on the chain, but enable this. One is keen investment. So typically, embedded finance has been a very attractive sector for investors, right? And has seen a steady capital inflow, and I'll get to it very soon. And finally, right, where can we finish any presentation without mentioning the word AI, right? You have some very interesting technology which is taking grip, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's cloud computing, whether it's blockchain, which are actually going to act as accelerants, right, to this embedded finance journey, right? So I'm going to go into each of these. I'm going to spend 2 to 3 minutes on each of these topics. Hopefully they're interesting enough, and you see what I mean by that. So the first is increasingly consumers are willing to buy or obtain certain financial services products. And I use the word certain because there are some products that people will still want to go to their traditional, trusted, reliable financial services entity. But an increasing number of people are willing to accept financial services from non-financial services companies, which are reputable, right, and have the brand. As I think it was Steve Jobs who said, people need banking. They don't necessarily need banks. Now, I know that's a little extreme in its language, but I think you understand the ethos of this. What's in front of you is a very interesting sort of survey, which was done with a cohort of customers who were basically asked that, would you be interested in consuming financial services if they're offered by these different category of providers, right? And obviously you saw a simple, you saw a bias towards gaming and console. And for all you gamers in there, I'm sure you guys are familiar. You guys are making payments real time using your games because you want to buy a widget, or you want to open a new door, or you want to get into something else, and so on and so forth. But funnily enough, it's interesting where you start seeing pharmacies, right? So 56% of the world who was interviewed, or the sample site said that if there are relevant financial services products, and I assume with pharmacy something like insurance goes well, right, they're more than happy to actually buy that product, right, if it is offered by a non-financial services, right? This is very interesting, right? This gives you the confidence that actually there is a market out there which might be either semi-revealed, or we use the word latent, which means it exists, someone needs to service. And Apple Pay is a great example, right? Apple Pay came, and now it's become like second nature for us to use our phones to make payments, and Samsung Pay and Google Pay and so on and so forth. Then what we did, and this is a very interesting study that we actually did, and this was done for a particular market in the Middle East, where we interviewed 1,500 micro and small businesses, and we asked them what are the different services that they need over their lifetime, and this was over a 5-year period, right? And the second question we actually asked them was that, are you willing to accept these services being developed and delivered to you from an ecosystem or a third-party provider who doesn't necessarily have to be a bank? And across the board, universally, the answer was yes. We are happy because we are time-starved, right, as small businesses. And if something can be provided to us in an integrated manner, we will take it. I'll come to an example later in the presentation with a company called Shopify, who I consider to be one of the greatest fintechs, although you wouldn't classify them as a fintech, but actually they generate more money out of financial services than their core product, which actually proved this hypothesis true. And I guess this hypothesis is true even for the KSA market. And we're seeing a number of SaaS platforms who are increasingly offering things like this. So what does that confirm to us? That the end customers are interested. We then asked and spoke to a number of non-FIs, whether it's retailers, healthcare providers, travel agents, airlines, right? Would you be willing to offer financial services deeply embedded into your products, right? So that it becomes a seamless journey. And across the board, right, the answer was yes. And a number of them gave us very different reasons why they would do it. But actually, without getting into all of these points, but you can read them, they went from everything from saying, well, financial services helps us increase the addressable market, to people saying it actually helps us differentiate our competitive positioning, which actually is quite a big thing to say, right? To say, I have financial services, it allows me to compete differently. And since then, I worked in some very interesting projects in the kingdom where we've done that, excuse me, with SaaS platforms, and that's true. So we have embedders who are keen to do that. We then did some qualitative surveys. So on the right-hand side, this is an ADL survey we did with the retail merchants, right, in the MENA region. I forget the number of participants, but the sample size was quite comprehensive. So it was well over 500 who said, why do they like using things like Apple Pay, BNPL, right, point-of-sale financing? And the reasons are quite obvious, right? Everything from customer conversion rate, right, to attracting new types of customers who would not have come to them. If you look at on the left-hand side, which is more of a global study, right, which has come through different sources, right, it corroborates what basically our merchants are actually saying in the MENA region, right? Which is, why do you like embedded finance, Mr. Retailer, or Mr. Healthcare Provider, or Mr. Hospital, or, or Miss Airline? Which is, it helps me increase my average basket size. It helps me attract new customers. It actually gives me better conversion rates, and it actually improves my value proposition, right? So we have customers who want it. We have embedders who want to do it. And here's a whole host of names, which I wanted to sort of share with you as an example. And by no means these are the only people, but there are different sectors which are offering embedded finance, right? And the one I wanted to go into was Shopify, for example. So just to give you guys an idea, and I don't know what the latest numbers are, but look them up. They're a listed company. Shopify now makes more money out of offering financial services through a series of fintech products, which they are delivering in partnership with Stripe. Stripe, I assume, is not the only partner, right? Who in turn is integrated with a number of banks and traditional financial services. And guess who's actually consuming all these services? It's the merchants which are using the Shopify platform. So all of a sudden, when people are coming to a Shopify platform, it is not how quickly can you launch your e-commerce site and how quickly can you start accepting payments, which was the easy stuff. But now these merchants are using the Shopify, I think it's called Shopify Capital, if I'm not wrong. I forget, or maybe the name has changed. They're using them for everything from doing tax forms to actually, treasury functions, to using BNPL, to actually raising working capital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so here's a great example where, embedded finance is actually working in a B2B scenario with micro and small businesses, and is so successful that actually Shopify makes more money out of financial services than it does out of its core business, right? So we covered the first two bits, right? Lots of customers like it. There are embedders who want to offer it. What's also quite exciting is that there are a number of players who are starting to offer embedded finance, right? And yes, the initial journey was all about payments, and yes, it was all about BNPL, and yes, it was all about point-of-sale financing. But now, with the regulation shifting, and I'll come to this point in a bit, where, with open banking and open finance coming, right, there is a symbiotic relationship between regulatory shift and embedded finance. We're starting to see some very, what in my view, high quality embedded finance players entering the market. And actually, some of them exist within your ecosystem in the KSA. I spend a lot of time in KSA, obviously courtesy my relationship with Fintech Saudi, but both as a consultant, right? And we get to meet them. So actually, there's some really, really good fintechs, right? Solution providers who are actually entering the market to unlock the opportunity. And here's a global example, which I just wanted to show you that, typically when people talk BNPL, they usually put a Klarna, right? Or they'll put in a firm, or they'll put an Afterpay. I want to introduce you to a company called Billy, right? And these numbers are slightly out of date because I don't have their latest numbers. But here is a BNPL player, right, which is focused on the micro and small medium enterprise, and they're actually working with banks, funnily enough, right? So they're not only working with embedders who are non-banking, but actually banks are now working with them to say, can we work with you to unlock a sector that ourselves we are unable to for whatever reason, right? So this is a very interesting shift. But then what are the incumbents doing, right? So what are the traditional banking players doing? And it's quite interesting that the embedded finance movement is actually making banks do some very, very interesting things. And there are 4 trends that I've captured here for you, and by no means these are the only. One is banks are saying, something, I want to become orchestrators. So why can't I become a financial super app? Why can't I actually become a super app? And I don't want to get into the super app discussion because I think you got a presentation last week on it. But a great example of this is Tinkoff, a company that started with a credit card and a lending business. Today, they offer non-banking services embedded in their ecosystem, right? You then have Kakao Bank. And for people who don't know, this is out of Korea. And Kakao is a big ecosystem, right? And Kakao Bank actually feeds the ecosystem. So very similar to the Shopify example, but here the bank and the ecosystem are party. But now Kakao Bank is not limited just to work with a ecosystem player, but they're able to do things, right, with third parties. So I call these two poster childs of ecosystems, right? Also looking at the embedded finance opportunity has opened up the opportunity for a number of banks to becoming banking as a service players. The example I'm leaving with you here is a bank called Cross River. Cross River, just to let you know, only operates as a banking as a service provider. They don't actually speak to the end customer. Their customers are embedded finance fintechs like Affirm, right? They're in the US. And then you have companies like Oak North, right, which have gone down the product innovation route and said, can we build comprehensive products for our particular segment, which meets their wider need, not just a specific financial services need, but can we do something more holistic, right? So here are 4 examples of what incumbents are doing, right? Now, I talked about what is, what are the banks doing? We keep hearing about banking as a service. I'm not going to do that in today's discussion because I think that's a whole different topic. But the growth in embedded finance, you could argue, is triggering new business models within the incumbents, right? In addition to banking as a service, we're seeing banks wanting to increasingly becoming platforms, right? And that shift is starting. I know we are at a very early stage in our region, but you will see some of these emerge. And then you actually have certain banks who are looking at, can we be ecosystem players, right? Can we go beyond banking? And there are a few examples that are emerging. I think it's early days, but in the UAE for sure, there are a couple of banks who are pursuing similar strategies, right? And I'll shout out one, ENBD being one of them, where they're saying, can we be an ecosystem player? So it's very interesting that the opportunity which has been from embedded finance is encouraging banks to think differently. I'm not going to labor on the point of Cross River. I talked about that earlier. I'm cognizant of time. So this is in the deck, but this is just to give you an idea. We talked about Tinkoff, and you can see in this, I'll hold for about 30 seconds on this slide, is just to see how a bank, right, started seeing the embedded opportunity. And that's why we wanted to call it embedded everything, because it's not just embedded finance, but you could embed mobile networks. So banks are selling mobile networks. Banks are actually getting into the travel agency business, right? Banks are actually getting into the entertainment business in an embedded manner, right? Not just offering something as a, you apply for a credit card and you get 5% off when you go to the next cinema hall, but these are deeply embedded. You can actually go to a banking app, buy your ticket for the cinema hall from within the app, pay for it, order your popcorns and your Coke or Pepsi, and actually pay for all the entire experience. And then also take out an insurance if you're not, if you believe that you might not be able to make it to the movie. And this is all done in an embedded environment, right? So I wanted to actually show you that there is the flip side, which is actually as exciting, in my humble opinion, as the traditional conversation of embedded finance, right? I won't labor on cacao. These are all on it. But this is an interesting slide. So what I wanted to do was, I knew the examples that I gave you initially were banks that are still new age, right? So a lot of people say, Arjun, Tinkoff, Kakao, Cross River, they were only created 10, 15 years ago. These are not the best examples. So I actually wanted to show you that actually embedded finance is something which is being pursued by even the incumbents. JP Morgan's been around for, I don't know, 100 years. Goldman Sachs for decades, right? DBS is one of the oldest banks in Singapore, right? Commonwealth Bank in Australia. So there's this shift towards embedded finance, and banks wanted to play a greater part in it, has started. And I can only confirm that embedded finance today / banking as a service is in the top 5 agenda item of every bank that I have met in the last 1 year, whether it is in the kingdom or in the wider region. So you can imagine the amount of thought, energy, intellect, and resources which are heading in this direction. So this is why I say that for the coming decade, right, if you're looking for a career in financial services, keep an eye on what happens on embedded finance, right? So we come to arguably, in my view, the greatest catalyst of change, right? And let's be cognizant that none of this embedded finance, banking as a service stuff will realize its potential if we don't see the necessary regulatory evolution, right? Here's a very simple picture, which basically talks about how you take the world from a closed banking environment, which is, I guess, a decade in the past, but what we were completely, I guess, familiar with, and some of the banks still operate in that model in some products, to things which become open banking, right? Things that extend beyond banking to open finance and eventually become open economy. If I was to use one variable that is shifting across this entire spectrum, is data. It is the ability to access data. It is the ability to analyze that data, and it is the ability to use that data to make sensible, personalized decisions. So if you were to totally summarize this slide into one thing, which would not be fair, this journey from closed banking to open economy, the greatest catalyst in this is data. Now, everything else has to fall into place, the business models, capabilities, processes, products, so on and so forth. But the juggernaut on this, I guess what drives the juggernaut on this is data. And that was the point I want to make with this slide. Now, in our part of the world, we're starting to see this journey, right? Open banking is coming into the kingdom, right? Open finance has just been announced in the UAE, right? And I think we're all going to move in different ways and shapes towards the top right corner, right? Will it be ideal exactly the way it is? I do not know. But what will be very interesting if we can actually get over the regulatory challenges and also ensure that data privacy is maintained is imagine if you have cross-sectorial data which can be brought together to actually better understand the customer. I'll give you an example, right? I have a credit card. I'm vegetarian. Every week, I get a free offer to go eat steak, right? And I find that bizarre because I've been using the same credit card for 5 years, right? They have my entire payment history. They can see I don't go to eat steak, right? But every week I get steak. And here's the point around data. And again, I labor. It's not because they don't have access to my data. They do. But for whatever reason, they're not analyzing it. And they're definitely not using it to personalize it. And I think that's the wake-up call to banks, right? In the past, banks have gotten away with that sort of an attitude. I guess that's not going to happen going forward because competitors will come and give the customers, a different experience. And then those very customers are going to go back to their banks and say, start changing, right? And when I say, what has been the greatest benefit of the fintech revolution that we have seen globally, in my humble opinion, what it has been is that it has made banks change their core proposition. So it's actually been a subliminal impact in their evolution, right? So very interesting. I spent 1 minute on this slide. I don't want to dwell in it. Apologies, is a little bit complex in the way it is presented, but all I want you to do is focus on the dark blue boxes. What I'm trying to show here is that there is a very interesting symbiotic relationship between regulation, which is open banking, for example, the monetization of new business models, which is banking as a service, and then embedded finance, which is addressing new use cases, right? And if you want the perfect, if I may use the term party again, we need all three of these things to come together. And if you can get all these three things to come together, and obviously there are some other blue boxes out there, we will truly realize the value of embedded finance. If we are not able to get open banking to do what it needs to do, and if you're not able to get the incumbent banks to adopt new banking models, which also are going to be determined by the regulation, I can assure you that embedded finance will not realize their potential. And we can see some of those challenges already today, right? As a number of global models are failing. And those failures to me are not, something which should scare us away from not doing what we are doing, which is disruption and innovation. They're basically just serving us, a reminder that we need to do things in the right way, right? And this is not the wild, wild west, and everybody needs to comply. Now, number 6, right, which is interest from investors. The point I'm trying to make here is that we've gone through, I guess, a funding winter, and I guess we're still in some form of the funding winter globally, right? But if you actually look at it, where has there been a substantial amount of VC money still heading? I know it's down, and it's actually heading in the direction of the conversations you and I are having. Now, I'm not comparing this to AI or, the NVIDIA chips and so on and so forth. I'm talking from a fintech sector. If you look at the top 3 or 4 categories, it's everything to do with embedded finance, banking as a service, open banking platforms, embedded payments. And I don't think this shifts because I firmly believe, and that's what I've been saying for the last 40 minutes, is that this is where I think the shift will come. Now, very quickly, I go to number 7. And the point I want to make here is what's awesome is that some of the new technologies that we are seeing, which consume us in every way, whether that's AI, including Gen AI, whether it's cloud computing and infrastructure, right, new age infrastructure, whether it's Web3, blockchain, and the emergence of digital assets. And I've given some examples. They, in my humble opinion, are awesome accelerants, right? And possibly will lead to the adoption of MFI even more rapidly. There's an interesting viewpoint that will be shared by Fintech Saudi, where me and a few of my colleagues have written an article on how we see AI impacting embedded finance. Please do read it if the topic is of interest to you, right? I've given you some active use cases on AI. I don't see the point to get into it, but I wanted to stop on this page. This was actually quite an interesting conversation that we had. And this is on the back of some of the initial data that we are seeing in terms of where AI is being used in some of the embedded finance players, right? And actually, you can start to see that some of this stuff, is already quite well developed, and AI is playing an interesting role, biometrics being one. But then there are some very interesting things like dynamic risk management and behavioral analysis, which I personally think can have hugely a significant impact on lending, for example, right? And point of sale lending or on the spot lending, because we're then going to have metrics, or sorry, data points that are other than our salaries or our bank accounts, which allow people to actually ascertain whether or not we should be giving data. And tell you something, these models exist, by the way, right? These models have existed. They've existed over 10, 15, 20 years. But what AI is doing is actually making these models scalable, more accurate, right? More reliable. So that's very interesting from an AI and how that impacts embedded finance. Now, last 5 to 6 minutes, because I'm cognizant of time. After all that euphoria and excitement, right? The truth of the matter is, as I said with the starting, is we're relatively in an early stage of development, right? So embedded finance has started, and this is one way, one representation to show you that actually where you are actually seeing where the VC money is sort of going, right? You'll see there's a lot on the left-hand side, right? And you're starting to see some later stage growth. But when you look at later stage growth, it tends to be around payments, insurance platforms, right? Compliance APIs, lending products. But there's a whole plethora of incredibly interesting products, right, which are going to come in our world. I'm currently working on a very interesting engagement in wealth management, and how do you use AI-based robo advisory, right, rather than the non-AI-based robo advisory, which is based on, I guess, a bunch of people at the back creating portfolios, which is going to have a huge impact on asset management, which is a huge sector by itself, and so on and so forth, right? Here's an indicative view, right? This is not a qualified view, right? It's basically based on the discussions that we consistently have. And what you will see is that even in the retail and the e-commerce space, and more on the offline retail space, right? Because on e-commerce, it's easier to embed BNPL, for example, right? And I think pretty much every e-commerce site now offers some level of BNPL. They're still at a very early stage of embedding, right? I think the real opportunity which someone will look to unlock is how do we actually start providing embedded finance in the offline environment. But I say that with a caveat. I firmly believe the whole concept of online and offline doesn't exist anymore. I think we're moving to a future where our experiences, even offline, are going to be driven online, right? Where we are going to have all kinds of interactive screens. We're going to have mobile devices which will link into the stores that we are in. We'll be able to do our shopping using our mobile devices, pay from the mobile devices, and leave the stores. So as that lines start blurring, it creates more opportunity for financial services to get embedded, because the honest truth is it's always easier to embed something in a completely digital journey rather than a journey which is broken between digital and physical, so, or we might call it phygital journey, right? And that will unlock all the other sectors. That's very interesting. A sector that I follow very, very carefully and very interestingly is what's actually happening in the travel space, right? And for those who are interested, I think you should just Google embedded finance and travel, and you'll be surprised with the number of players, but not just the number of players, but actually the width of the solutions which is entering the travel industry and the travel sector, right? Now, why do I believe that embedded finance needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, and we need to be careful, because there is a fundamental risk, right, that embedded finance can potentially exasperate known risks, right? And you've read everything around, all the rhetoric around BNPL. Is it good? Is it not good? Is it putting people in debt? Is it increasing people in debt, right? And at the same time, because of the deep embedding it is very hard sometimes to assess, manage, and monitor, right? Because the more entrenched and embedded the financial product becomes in a customer journey, the harder it is to be able to be not regulated, but also understood in terms of what is the impact it is having, right? And again, this slide talks about the challenges that exist, and why are you seeing an increasing amount of focus from the regulator on customer, right? From a perspective of protection, right? Resilience, because whatever you might do, embedded finance should not result in, economic instability of any economy. And there is a potential risk if something becomes too fast, too big, too fast. There's all kinds of interesting conversation going on around data, and this is not just the financial regulator. Every regulator, whether it's the telco regulator or any otherwise, is cognizant about data, because as we talked about earlier, that's not just about financial data, which allows you to ascertain someone's worthiness, right? But it's also data. And then ensuring that clear governance and accountability is in the space. And that is a very interesting, if I may call, balance that needs to be struck, where regulation should be commensurate to the exposure that it creates in the market, but at the same time should be at an adequate level that it allows for innovation, but at the same time not, big, if I may say, failures, because that will hurt, in my humble opinion, the industry, the sector, and the rhetoric more than it will benefit. And I think the regulator's job is not easy, and it's a simple term. So I firmly believe that the regulators have a challenging job. Again, as I said, Rome was not built in a day, and nor will embedded finance, right? There are a number of factors that need to come together, right? And I'll just focus on two. One is, I think there is a lack of awareness. I think there is a big education piece that is required in terms of explaining people what embedded finance means, what embedded payments means, and that will drive take up. And actually, if you look at some of the statistics which come out of things like Apple Pay and so on and so forth, you basically see a gradual growth, and then you see a spike, right? And that is the point of inflection, in my humble opinion, in terms of acceptance, i.e. enough people are accepting it, but more importantly, people understand, right? Because I remember when Apple Pay first got launched, I still had friends taking out their cards and tapping it on the device. And I used to go and go, but why are you doing that? You can just do that with your phone. It was more a function of awareness, right? It was not a function of that they were worried. Yes, some of them were paranoid about the fact that, if I'm putting my phone, are they taking my phone numbers away? In any case, I don't have such phone numbers, so I care less about it. But that's important. The other area where I think it's essential for embedded finance is customization, right? And personalization. If we really want embedded finance to fly, we will need to see personalization, customization at a number of levels. And I'll give you an example, which is the easiest example, right? When BNPL got launched, the vast majority of the BNPL players used to tell me, once I've launched it for retail, I'll be able to do every other sector, right? The reality today is very, very different, right? There are markets, there are subsectors, there are use cases that not every BNPL player can succeed in. And so therefore, people are choosing their bets and they're specializing it. And the reason here is very, very simple. If you don't understand the business model where you are embedding that financial services, right, your chances of success are very, very limited, right? So I wanted to make that. Closing thoughts, 2 slides. Embedded finance, to the vast majority of the people on the call and to me, looks fairly simple, right? it's the iceberg which is above the water, right? The truth is, it takes a whole host of other things, whether it's regulatory licenses, whether it's the ability to build products, whether it's the right user interfaces, which are critical, and having the right fintech partnerships and offering to make it a reality. And the takeaway for me is very simple. If you are a retailer today and you want to start offering embedded finance, start to act and think more and more like a fintech. The more you would do that, the better are your chances that you will resolve all the iceberg challenges which are below the water. That's one lesson. The second closing thought, and this gets all my banking friends quite excited whenever I put this up, which is, if embedded finance truly realizes its potential, and I'm not a betting man, nor am I a soothsayer who can predict the future, one thing is very obvious: the financial services market structure will look very different. And here is a view. By no means am I saying this is the view, and by no means are the boxes commensurate to size, right? But you're going to see a number of new business models appear. What we are used to is this one left angle called legacy financial institution. Everything else is still early days, right? So we have a few Shopifys, we have Apple, we have Amazon, we have some of the non-financial services offering. We're starting to see BaaS platforms appear. As I mentioned, there are banks which are purely BaaS banks, and maybe in our part of the world, we might see that too, across river. But what's very interesting is that all of this is being underpinned by either fintech or techfin infrastructure, which enables that. With that, I think I'm on time, so I'm not going to be reprimanded by my friends at Fintech Saudi. So I've kept the time clock. I think we have 4 minutes to go. So I'd like to thank you for all of you who stayed on for the call. I hope this was informative. The deck will be shared with you, and so will the other articles. So with that, thank you. Karim, back to you.
Arjun, this was great. Thank you so much. It was extremely insightful. We do have some questions that have come in, and the topic is, like you said, itself, it's to a certain extent simple, but once you start digging in, you start seeing the bottom of that iceberg. One of the interesting questions that came through is from several people actually is the adoption in MENA in general of embedded finance solutions and the different moving parts. There's so many moving parts. You're talking about the regulators, you're talking about the incumbents, you're talking about the retailers and the consumers. And you mentioned a lack of awareness, which I think is super important as well. But if you were to yani, take all of these and put يعني, a light on what it is that might sort of catalyze the adoption of embedded finance, or embedded finance being available seamlessly like it's supposed to be, what would that be?
So good question. And you're putting me on the money here, right? So guys, this is my personal opinion, right? So I'm again going to stretch the envelope. So the way I see it, I'm going to use a combination of two things, right? I think all of those are important. For me, I think awareness will come over time, and if there are more products, awareness will grow. And a lot of the awareness also comes from the fact that you have good companies who spend a lot of good money on marketing and awareness, right? I think there is genuine appetite among the embedders who want to offer it, right? There's no doubt about it. I worked for one for 6 years. I grew that business in 32 countries, right? So it's not that it doesn't exist. I think it is a combination of regulatory clarity, right? In terms of, what does banking as a service and what does embedded finance mean in its entirety? And I don't just mean BNPL, because I think a lot of people focus their energy on BNPL because we're seeing some mass adoption. And the second factor is that then needs to encourage the incumbent banks, right, to play a role in this, right? And one of the challenges the banks have, although I think they are increasingly now cognizant of it, is that they don't want to get disintermediated from the end client, right? But I think the smart banks are realizing that actually that disintermediation does not mean that they are forgotten, and that disintermediation allows them to grow the addressable market, right? So you give a little, you get a lot more, right? But the fact is there is a leap of faith. So I think the answer is twofold. I think there needs a lot more regulatory maturity, and I think we are heading in that direction, right? And the second thing is it is the desire of the incumbent banks and NBFIs to start partnering with these fintechs, embedders, so on and so forth, because we will need them in a number of different ways, right? From a licensing perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from a capital perspective. So I hope that sort of answers the question. I think those to me are the two very critical, if I say hyperscale drivers, right? Otherwise, I think the cat is out of the bag. We are going to continue seeing growth. It might be slower, but we are. Right? Look at our BNPL players, like look at Tabby and Tamara, right? They're growing at such crazy pace, right? Just to give you an example. Sorry, I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you very much. It also leads to another question that is related to those banks and incumbents today, and our interaction as customers with them. Are we going to get to a stage where we're actually not going to the bank, or we don't know which bank we're using because we're using those financial services directly through the embedders? Is that how it's going to be, and how is that going to impact competition between banks, and how is that dynamic going to change? Right, today we're being bombarded by banks telling us you got to join me, take this credit card, use this personal loan, and so on. So how is that going to sort of evolve?
So let me there's a lot of questions to unpack out there, right? So let me try and unpack that into two or three questions if I got all of them in the order. So firstly, if I'm looking for clickbait, right, and I want lots of followers, I'll say, yep, nobody will ever go to a bank or a financial institution ever in the future. It's all about the new players. So in my humble opinion, maybe I'm showing my age and I guess my inability to think very disruptively. Banks and financial institutions have a very critical role to play. They will continue to play. They will have an end customer brand loyalty, and I think some of these banks will steal the march, right? They will actually innovate, because let's understand something. They have customers. They understand the regulation better than anybody else. They have capital, right? And they have the ability to buy and ingest and integrate anything. They're also attracting very good talent. So I think banks can align their strategy, and some of the banks will emerge. And I think there'll be different business models, and some banks will pursue multiple models, right? Where they will. I think we're going to see a concept that a number of, I guess, my fellow advocates write about, and I'm a big believer, which is something called cooperation, right? Which is when competitors actually come to cooperate because they can see a win-win scenario, right? And I think we will see more and more of that. I think what will happen is people will realize that there are certain types of players who are better at doing certain things, right? 5 to 10 years ago, every fintech, the conversation was banks versus fintech, right? 15 years ago when I started, when the word fintech was not even there, it was banks versus startups, then it became banks versus fintechs. I think now the conversation is more around banks and fintechs, right? So I think there's a role to play. In terms of the flux that you will see in the market, I think you will. I think we're going to, I think it's terribly exciting, right? Okay, it could be terribly irritating, but it's terribly exciting because I think as consumers, there will be greater choice, right? And I think you will get better at making those decisions. And those decisions won't be incumbent and won't hold us back for 10 years and 15 years, right? We'll be able to make much more fleet-footed decisions. What is the beauty of digital banking? I had this conversation with a very, very smart guy about 10 years ago. He says, everybody talks about how digital banking makes onboarding easy. He says, why doesn't anyone talk about how digital banking makes offboarding as easy? Right? So
Sure.
I think we as customers, I think are going to enjoy the future. I think there's going to be more choice. I think there'll be more noise. for the foreseeable future, right? But if you're able to navigate through the noise, I think we as customers should be net winners out of this disruption.
Uh, I have two more questions for you,
Go
easy
ahead. Go ahead.
questions.
Go ahead.
And I want to, I know, I'm also being aware of time as well. So the first is we've seen embedded financial solutions sort of sneak into retail, and they're becoming a bit more prominent in the retail sector. Uh, you've mentioned the tourism sector. If you were to talk or mention two, three other sectors that you see it coming to, where would you see that going?
So I think B2B is very, very interesting, right? So this will be B2B offerings, which will be targeting merchants, right? Doesn't have to be retail merchants. It could be any merchants, and especially merchants that are riding on top of ecosystems, right? So whether they are, restaurants, whether they are service providers for household, service providers, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity in the whole B2B sector. The other sector that actually interests me and excites me quite a lot is automotive, right? Automotive sector arguably produces some of the highest quality data, right? And actually that data is quite capturable and has been done for ages, right? I can go back 20 years when, insurance companies had introduced insurance, which was on the basis of how well you drove and what time of the day you drove, and was not just on the size of the engine and the age of the insurer, right? So I personally think, as we spend more and more time in mobility solutions, and automotive being one of them, because that's, we don't realize that, after the amount we sleep and the amount we work, there's a significant amount of time we spend in our cars, right? Or
Sure.
some sort of an automotive device. I personally think there's been more and more integration of financial services in there, whether it's payments, whether it is insurance and others. So those are two sectors I would say you look at it. And when I actually use the word tourism, I think you said it very correctly, Kareem. I think we should look at the entire hospitality sector. So we should look at tourism and hospitality, which includes travel, airlines, hotels, the whole new sort of segment around Airbnbs and so on and so forth, where you can do some very interesting financial solutions, use cases. So I think you picked an interesting section. So, these two are, or these three, if you take B2B, are three which I sort of think are going to grow. They're relevant for our part of the world. And I think we're seeing some good fintechs come in that place. Your last question. I can still see we're holding on to our participant crowd. So,
Yes,
so that's
yes.
not bad.
Usually the last question is what resources would you recommend? But you've already recommended plenty of links and resources. So thank you for that. That means we have one more question. Would the impact of embedded finance on financial inclusion, is that something that is relevant?
Hugely relevant, hugely relevant. So let's take the broader sense of financial inclusion, right? A lot of people think, when they think financial inclusion, their mind goes to India or Africa and people living in small villages with no access to modern financial solutions, right? Financial inclusion is a much wider topic, in my humble opinion, right? To me, I tend to use financial inclusion, correctly or incorrectly, as what I call the underserved market, right? And for me, the micro and small businesses are massively underserved, right? And they are always the top of our agenda every year, okay? And every year we fail to deliver against it. And the reason we fail to deliver against it is for a number of reasons, such as, okay, the cost of acquiring these customers is expensive, right? The access to data, the data that we are used to, is not easily available, right? They are arguably not the most financially savvy people. That does not make them less intelligent. It's just their priorities are different. Because let's be honest, it's Kareem, me, and a third person who are running a business, right? We have a job to do, right? I personally think that, and I again come back to that B2B, right? For me, if you take financial inclusion in the wider sense, then it's a great catalyst. digital payments for me has been arguably the greatest catalyst for bringing people into the what I call the broader organized financial services sector, because it's given them an ability to pay. And I think what you will see is that there's a lot of innovation which will happen on top of payments. If you look at BNPL at the end of the day, right? BNPL is an innovation which has happened on top of payments, right? It's you are checking out, you're about to pay, and someone gives you an alternative payment mechanism which has lending embedded in, right? So again, I actually see that payments is actually going to be a trigger, right? And there's going to be lots of interesting stuff which can be built around payments, because, I have this analogy with, they say that, if data is the new oil, payments data is the olive oil, right? Which means it's the highest quality of oil that you get. So I think you'll see a lot of innovation. So I hope I've been able to answer that financial inclusion question from a more relevant to this part of the world. But I assume if there's people from Egypt, it's a different kind of challenge with financial inclusion, right? It's more like the India and the African example I gave.
Arjun, I think you've answered this question and all the other questions, as well as provided us with a very, very insightful session. Thank you so much for your time and for
Thank
your
you.
insights. And it's always a pleasure having you in our FinTech summer sessions. I'm sure we're gonna have you
No, I
next
think you
year.
guys do a brilliant job. I think, more people should do this. I think, it's great to see, it's very impressive to see such a large number of people, coming in, even if they take 5% away from all these sessions you're doing. I think it's very important from a talent, awareness, education, catalyzing the sector. So well done to you guys. And, which is why you can always count on my support and help if required. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you. With that, I want to move on to two announcements related to 24 FinTech. If Arjun, you can unshare your screen for a second so we can share
Sure.
our screen from our
Sure.
side, please. Thank you.
Yes. Stop share.
So we
Is
have
that
two
a,
exciting announcements. Yes, it's unshared. I'm just waiting for Lena to share. Two exciting announcements. Tomorrow we have a preview of 24 FinTech. We have a panel discussion that will be held on online webinar. We have four very exciting speakers that will be joining us. We will also shed light on the different topics that will be discussed during the conference. We will be shedding light on the different activities and the different tracks so that you can benefit from as either entrepreneurs or individuals interested in fintech. So there's a lot of information that's going to be shared tomorrow. If you have not registered for the webinar that is happening tomorrow with regards to 24 FinTech, make sure you do so. Uh, it's truly going to be something
yeah.
that
I,
gives
I, I I can only endorse that. All four are good friends of mine, and they're all worth listening to.
thank you for that. So please scan that code and register. It's happening tomorrow, so we'd love to have you there as well. And do feel free to share it with anyone of your colleagues or friends that might be interested in that. So that's one. Two, we have you here with us. We know you are leaders and or enthusiasts when it comes to fintech in general. We're launching a competition where we're inviting you all to come and write a 1,000 word essay. Try not to use, or preferably don't use ChatGPT at all, uh, relevant to the event. So the event, the conference has four themes: global interoperability, governance, risk and policy, strategic investment and collaborative partnerships, as well as reimagining financial services. So what we're inviting you to do is choose one of those topics and write a thought leadership paper on it, a 1,000 word essay on it, and share it by the 15th of August. So if you scan that code, it will take you to the form and gives you all the instructions related to this competition. So please scan that and get all that information. We look forward to receiving your submissions on that topic. Uh, if you can go back, Lena, just to the previous one, the essay, the competition one. So we look forward to receiving your thoughts on this competition and your submission. There, the winners will be announced at the conference itself. You will get a VIP badge. So the winners will get a VIP badge, which will give you access to some of or all areas of the conference, while an attendee badge will not give you access to every single part of the conference. So keep that in mind. And we will definitely be publishing your essays with your name and highlighting it during the conference as well as FinTech Saudi. So if you haven't scanned the code, please scan the code as well. And what we'll do is also we'll add the link to the competition in the chat here with us. Last but not least, on to the next slide. Please feel free to register to attend 24 FinTech. It's shaping up to be an amazing conference. We have top-notch speakers, including Arjun, that will be joining